Welcome, everyone. I'm Dr. Katina Pollock from the University of Western Ontario, and joining me is my colleague.
I'm Fei Wang from the Faculty of Education, University of British Columbia.
And we welcome you all for coming here today. This 1-hour session focuses on work intensification. The role of Canadian principals and vice principals is changing, and this is one of the things that we want to share with you. This is a SSHRC-funded project, and we'd like to thank SSHRC. I would also like to take a moment to do a land acknowledgement for where I am in Ontario. I wish to acknowledge this land in which Ontario lays. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron, Wendat, and the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. I would also like to acknowledge that the work we do around principals, their work and well-being is it's in concern and care and service of the children that we serve in public education. I would also like to say a huge thank you to all of the folks behind the scenes with the K-12 Workplace Wellbeing Seminar Series for hosting this session today, and the many other great sessions that they have hosted and will continue to host. In particular, the EdCan team for their Well at Work initiative, which is doing really great work to make workplace well-being in the K-12 education system a top priority. If you have not checked out their website, please do. I'd ask probably not through our presentation, but maybe after. They have a lot of resources that you may find quite beneficial for yourselves and your organization. Fei and I have organized this session in this manner. We're going to report on two surveys that were conducted in the fall of 2019, one in Ontario and one in British Columbia. So the title of this session is a little bit misleading because it's not all Canadian principals. However, we do have recent data and reports on vice principals in Ontario and French Catholic principals of Ontario. Those reports are available, and other resources both on the EdCan website and the Ontario Principals Council website. What we plan to do today is in the first 20 minutes, I will speak to the Ontario study, and our preliminary findings being reported here today are descriptive and inferential statistics, and then Fei will share the British Columbia statistics and survey findings. We have chosen to do it this way because we have not gone the next level where we are have done any statistical comparisons between the two provinces. We can compare, but from a mathematical statistical significance perspective, we can't give you any answers in comparison in that manner right now. So no further ado, I'm going to share quite briefly with you the demographics. And I should also add, this is being recorded. The recording will be available to you online through the EdCan website when it's processed after we're finished. And after Fei's presentation, we will have about 20 minutes to accept questions. So on the Ontario survey, we sent out 2,419 surveys. We had a response of a little over 900. 860 surveys were eventually used for our data analysis. The others were some that were just started and had the first couple of questions answered and no other responses, and they weren't viable for analysis. We had an overall response rate of 35.6%. You can see in the slide the breakdown of how many principals participated based on the panel or the level that they are principals, elementary, secondary, middle school. When we look at the range of years, the average years of experience for principals was around 8.7 years. And the number of female principals was 64.2%, male principals was 35.0%, prefer not to answer was 0.7, and non-binary 0.1. The highest level of education achieved, there was a small percentage of principals that had a PhD or an EDD. It was 0.2%. Majority, more than half of principals that participated in this study in Ontario had a master's degree or hold a master's degree. Very quickly, we thought we would start off with this response to this question. How the political climate surrounding public education has influenced principals' work. In Ontario, you can see from the left to the right and then circling back around from the highest percentage to the lowest percentage of principals that responded to this question. 94.5% indicated that growing mental health issues among students, teachers, and parents was influencing their work last fall. Now, I would like to share with you that this presentation, we frame our work around work intensification. We won't speak to work intensification throughout the remainder of the slides, but the data we're presenting leads to and can be understood through work intensification. And what we mean by work intensification, in case you were wondering, we mean principals, school leaders who find themselves in a situation where they are working longer hours, and in those longer hours, they are engaged in more of the same tasks, and on top of those more of the same tasks are additional kinds of tasks asked. And doing that with less resources in a world that is much faster paced than what they have been experiencing in previous years. And in that situation where they experience no downtime to recover, to recoup, to catch up. This is how we understand work intensification. And I just want to be clear about that because all work can be intensified at times, but work intensification is when it's ongoing and leads to issues in health and well-being, which is what we want to share today as well. So I'd like to first look at the bottom part of this slide. I think this is quite important. The average number of hours worked was 57.3 hours. This is much higher than the national average from Statistics Canada. Statistics Canada has gathered data around what they call education managers, managers in the education field over the past 5 years, and the average is between 35 to 36 hours per week. Here you can see that principals are working about 57.3 hours per week. And in our previous studies, we have numbers like 59 hours per week, 58 hours per week for principals and vice principals. And 97.5% of principals said that they work more than 40 hours a week. So we also asked principals in Ontario overall how well they feel they manage their work. And you can see a little over 55% said they feel they are managing it good, and outstanding, another 5 to 6%. Average is 30%, and if we look at the percentages from average poor and very poor, we can see that about 37% of principals did not share with themselves that they do not feel that they manage their work well. Now, please don't. I also want to express that principals in this survey who responded also said they enjoy their work, they find their work fulfilling, they have fairly high levels of satisfaction, but there are some things that they're worried about, and there are some things about their work that they find challenging that we're trying to shed light on today. So when we look at principals, where they spend their time or how they spend their time, you can see from the left to the right, from the dark, this is green, from the, we can see, oh, the slide is a little off, my apologies. So student discipline and attendance, that's 10.3. This is where principals say they spend most of their time per week on average, not every week, because some weeks there may be very little student discipline and other weeks there may be quite a bit, but on average. And as you can see, as the line gets lighter, these are the activities that they spend a little less time on. When we ask them how much time they spend on communication activities, what you can see in our circle of spheres, at the very top, a lighter blue is 10.5 hours per week on email. And then as we go around clockwise, you can see the less hours per week spent on communication. Second to principal's email is informal impromptu meetings, 7.8 hours per week, almost 8 hours per week. What we have found since doing this research is that principals are also engaging in other kinds of communication, not just email, but also texting and using different forms of information communication technology to communicate with one another. Email often for parents, texting often for staff. So there's now another layer being added on that is not explored in this survey at this time when we did the study. And they would prefer to spend less time or the same amount of time on other modes of communication, texting, phone calling. So how do principals feel about their overall well-being at work? Now this is overall well-being. This is not the various types of well-being that we explore later. And if any of you participated in the survey, you will remember that we've broken this down into different types of well-being and wellness. And you can see in this situation that principals, 25% have indicated neutral, 25%, well, 25 to 30 have indicated very poor to poor. And from good to excellent, we have about 45% that say good to excellent. So as I mentioned, what do we mean by wellness and well-being? So currently there are many, many different definitions and ways to understand well-being. For us, we chose for the survey to use the Ontario's Wellbeing Strategy for Education discussion document that breaks well-being into several areas. And we subdivided this section of the survey into these areas. And that included spiritual, cognitive, emotional, social, and physical, and asking you or principals and leaders in the school system about these aspects of well-being. And what we found was, for those principals that responded to the survey, the aspects of well-being that are considerably or extremely affected when they are feeling drained from their work, this is what they shared. They shared that their emotional well-being is significantly affected by when they feel drained at work, almost 65%. 46% around psychological, 44 around physical, 35 around social, cognitive 34, and spiritual 15. We also asked people how they manage their well-being. How do they manage to stay well and be well? Overall, how well principals thought they were managing their well-being. We have almost 40% said good, about 43, 44% good to excellent. Almost 30% said neutral. And we have about 25% that indicated very poor to poor. How well do they feel they can cope with work-related stress? As you can see here, again, we have more than 50% that have indicated that they can and are doing that well. Another almost 30% indicated neutral, and about 16% are struggling. When asked about self-care strategies principals use, you will see that there are a variety of strategies that principals engage in. And we have included, we did not necessarily ask principals about whether the strategy was an effective coping strategy or potentially an ineffective coping strategy. So for instance, some principals indicated that eating healthy was a positive strategy, but unhealthy eating is not necessarily a positive strategy. So sometimes the strategies were very neutral in the questioning, but in the responses below, people indicated what they meant by that. So some said, I engage in healthy eating and that has helped me so much, and others have indicated, I don't eat healthy. I don't eat at all during the workday, and or the foods that I do eat do not help me. We also asked about workplace discrimination that principals have experienced. And for those principals that answered this question, almost 50%, 46% said that they experienced none. But for the other half that did respond to this question, they had a different story to share. So 27% said that they had experienced gender-based incidences of discrimination, almost 15% around age-based, 10.6 race-based, 5.9 sexual orientation-based, 43 religion-based, 4.3 religion-based, 4.3 ability-based, and 2.9 other. When we probed deeper and asked about safety issues that principals have experienced at work and by whom, you can see that for those that responded to this question, parents, guardians, and family members, for principals who indicated that they had been harassed, they have been predominantly harassed by parents, guardians, and family members. Physically assaulted, mainly by students, almost 58%, and threatened mainly by students. A large percentage indicated that they had not experienced either. And for their relationships with teachers, principals indicated that in terms of being harassed, they were harassed. 30% of them said that they had been harassed by teachers. And there's a lot on this table. We were trying to figure out how to get as much in there with as little time as possible. So I hope that was clear. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn this over to Faye, and Faye's going to talk about the BC data. And at the end, we're going to come together, Faye and I, and talk about individual strategies that principals, coping strategies, and that principals have indicated that they engage in, and also what organizations can do. We'll do those two together, and then we'll open it up. So I'm going to send it over to you now, Faye.
Thank you, Katina. Thank you for joining us. Before I get started, I would like to acknowledge I'm presenting this today on the ancestral, traditional, and unceded territory of the Coast Salish people, in particular Squamish, Musqueam, and Tuslayo-Wartooth First Nations in Metro Vancouver. And I would like also to thank the Principals Association, OPC, and BCPA, PVPA for their support along all the stages of the research, design, and delivery and distribution. And also thank all the participants who have contributed to the survey. So for the BC, we sent out 1,239 invitations to BC principals, and we have received the valid cases 474 after the data cleaning. So the response rate is at 38.3%. And also within the participating principals, 69% of the principals are from elementary schools, and 19% of them are from the secondary schools, and we have 8% from the K-12 schools and 3% from the middle schools. In average, the participating principals' years of work experience is 7.1. And the highest level of education achieved, 93.3% of them holding a master's degree. And also there's another 1.7% of them are having a doctoral degree. In terms of the gender, we have 58% of them are female principals and 42% are male principals who participated in the survey. We also have 1.2% of the participating principals who prefer not to answer the question, but we do not have anyone who identified as non-binary. In terms of the age, we have a little bit over 45% of the participating principals are below the age of 50. So overall, you may notice there's a similar storyline between the data in BC and Ontario, but there are also some contextual differences across the two provinces. So in the question about the political climate, how that influences principals' work, the number one is the growing mental health issues among students, teachers, and parents. So around 88% of the principals indicated this is an issue that's having an impact on their work. And the next is the system anxiety within the education. And the following this is the contextual differences, basically about the Supreme Court ruling on class size and composition and BC new curriculum change. Those two came up at a higher percentage as well. So the job demand, Dr. Katina Pollack has touched on this. For the job demand, overall, there's an increased job demands in the system, but there's also a positive outlook among the participating principals. For example, over 90% of the participating principals indicated they know how to get their job done, and also another 93% indicated their job makes a difference in the school community, and about 89% of the BC principals also indicated their school is a good place to work. So how much time do principals spend per week in BC? The average number of hours principals work in BC is 56.9 hours. Over 97% of the participating principals indicated they work more than 40 hours per week. We also asked about how well principals manage their work. As you can see on the top of the slide, over 65% of them indicated they manage their work in a good or outstanding manner, and around 27% indicated average, and there's 7.9%, 8% indicated poor. So where do they spend their time, and how do they spend their time? This is when you look at the chart from the left to the right, you probably notice there's a similar story compared to the Ontario data. So the student discipline and attendance came at the highest, which is at the 7.4 hours. Then next is the internal school management, around 6.9 hours. Walking hallways and playground, around 6.6 hours in average, and 5.2 hours on student well-being and 5.2 hours on special education. So overall, principals tend to spend their time more on the managerial and administrative tasks. And they also indicated they spent 3.5 hours on curriculum and instructional leadership. And we also had a follow-up questions asking them about where do they prefer to spend their time more. So 49% of the principals would like to, 79% of the principals would like to spend more time on instructional leadership, and 80% would like to spend more time on their own professional development, and around 80% also would like to spend more time on classroom walkthroughs. And principals also indicated they want to spend less time on internal school management, around 50%, and less time on student discipline or attendance, around 46%, and also less time on administrative directives, around 41%. So we also asked about where do they spend their time in terms of the modes of the communication, and the email came up at the top, similar to the Ontario data. So they spent 9.6 hours in average on their emails, and the next is 6 hours around informal meetings, then 4.7 hours around formal meetings, and 3.1 hours on the phone, then 2 on text messaging, and also 1.5 on other modes of communication, then 1.4 on social media, and 1.4 on school newsletter. And lots of principals also indicated they would prefer to spend less time on their emails. So how do principals feel about their overall well-being at work? So in the chart, you probably noticed, so over 44% of the principals feel their overall well-being at work is good or excellent. And there's around 1 in 3 principals indicated their overall well-being in at work is poor or very poor. And also there's 1 in 4 principals in BC also indicated their overall well-being is neutral. So we also asked about when they feel drained, how do they feel, or which aspect of their well-being considerably or extremely affected. So the emotional well-being also came at the top at around 55%, followed by physical well-being around 38%, then the psychological well-being around 36%, social well-being around 32%, then cognitive around 26%. The last one is the spiritual well-being around 17%. So followed by that, we also asked the questions how well the principals thought they were managing their well-being. Over 44% of them feel they manage their well-being good or excellent. And we also asked about how well they feel they cope with work-related stress. So it's over 9% indicated they cope with their work-related stress good or excellent. So in terms of the self-care, as Dr. Katina Pollock indicated, we did not ask specifically if those coping strategies are effective or not, but we did ask what kind of coping strategies they have used. So among all the self-care coping strategies principles used, over 63% of the indicated spending time with family, friends, and pets. That one came up at the top of the other strategies. Then the second is the watching TV and movies, around 55%, physical activities, exercises, around 53%, and talking with my family and friends, around 52%. As for the how BC principals experiencing work-related discrimination, 43% of them indicated they have never experienced the workplace discrimination, but another over half the other BC principals have experienced various workplace-related discrimination. So the gender-based discrimination appeared at the top at around 28%, followed by age-based discrimination around 20%, then ability-based discrimination and race-based discrimination around 8%, and sexual orientation-based discrimination around 6%, then religious-based discrimination around 5%, and there's also 2.8% other. And within the other, based on the open-ended questions, we have identified some other discrimination principles have experienced, such as new to the district, no children of their own, or not being local, or the language, the way they speak, or having an accent. So the safety issues principals have experienced at work, there's lots of information there. So just to give you a brief overview, and then this table basically highlights the different groups of individuals who have contributed to unsafe situations or conditions to BC principles. So we look at the second column, over 60% of BC principals indicated parents, guardians, family members have harassed principals, and also 29% of the BC principals have experienced harassment from teachers. The second column is about being threatened. Again, the 52% of the principals have experienced a threat from parents, guardians, and family members, and also around 40% of the indicated they have experienced threat from students. And the last column is on physical assault. Over 40%, around 38% of the principals indicated they have experienced physical assault from students, and also 45% of principals indicated they have not experienced the physical assault. And we also had a follow-up question on the being harassed or physically assaulted, and what actions principals tend to take after being harassed or physically assaulted or threatened. So 54% of them would report to senior management directors or HR. Over 50% also would talk with their family members or friends, and also another 50% would consult with the other colleague with the district school board. There's around 10% of principals who will not do anything. So In terms of the self-care, here are just some of the tips that I would like to share because the time limit, I cannot go into details. And also this is an individual endeavor, and it depends on the school context, the individual principals, and some of you may have already doing those kind of work. So this is just some suggestions that hopefully will be helpful to manage work-related stress and well-being. And the first one is identify the stressors, whether stress that are at the organizational level or at the system or policy level, and develop a healthy response to the various stressors to help manage the work-related stress. The second is create a physical routine by following the SMART approach. So SMART approach, which stands for specific, basically if you set up the specific goals to motivate yourself to do a physical exercise, and measurable, so basically giving yourself a measure when you have achieved your short-term goals in order to achieve the long-term goals, and make your short-term goals attainable. Make sure you are physically capable of achieving the goal you have set, and realistic. So your goal should be based on the realities of the circumstances or your life or work styles, and also have a time frame. Set a reasonable deadline for when you'd like to achieve your goal. And the next is eating healthy. I think Dr. Katina Pollack has touched on that. So have a healthy diet, drink lots of water to maintain the energy, have a good sleep hygiene, and also practice healthy thinking. So healthy thinking is basically not just about the positive thinking, but also think in a balanced way. And reduce isolation. Based on our research, around 42% of the BC principals reported they have experienced isolation at work. So we recommend that principals build a healthy and supportive network with their family members or colleagues, and make time to be with them who can offer mental or emotional support for their work. And also come out with the strategies to deal with uncomfortable or unpleasant emotions, following the steps such as pause, acknowledge what you're thinking and think, and also help manage emails. I think Dr. Katina has done some research on that area. Katina, would you like to share some of your thoughts on that one?
Thank you, Faye. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
There we go. I have myself muted. Yes, so in the research that I've done around the use of email is that trying to find a one-size-fits-all strategy for a school district, a school board, or a school can often be difficult because people's work patterns are somewhat different. But overall, some of the strategies are setting boundaries, what that may be for you. And it could be for some people that their boundaries are that they'll answer emails and read emails and answer them anytime during the week, but not on the weekend. Whereas other people will be, they will only answer emails while they're at school, after school, during a certain number of hours. The other is, so setting boundaries around when to engage in emails is one thing. The other is, in the business world, they talk about sorting emails. And I know for many professional programs that school boards use, that is already organized for most principals, and there are folders so that emails fall into various folders. But for some that don't have that, that is also another option about how to organize them. Another one is setting priority boxes. Only read an email once, never read it multiple times, and respond to it if you can. And one of the arguments around that is that unless it is something that requires more information, you will carry that email with you in your mental capacity and your mind in thinking about it when you are also supposed to be engaging in other kinds of cognitive work. So they're talking about the cognitive load. These are things that individuals, though, really need to think about what works best for them rather than necessarily what organizations can do. That doesn't mean that organizations and school boards and schools and provincial governments can't be engaged in some kind of a way of around supporting, I would say, not just email now, but information communication technology such as texting, the uses of social media, particularly with virtual learning now and virtual schooling. Over to you, Faye.
Oh, I cannot move the slides.
Okay, so I'll go to the next slide. Oh, it's a great segue in. Is that okay?
Yeah,
I'll do the next
go
one.
ahead.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. So, how systems and professional associations can support principals. We have, there are two infographics that, let me back up. Each study has 4 infographic booklets that have general information in 4 areas. Work intensification, well-being, safety, and coping strategies. And in total, there are 8 of them. They are available online. Our reports are almost ready to be released. They are being shared with our respective associations that worked with us to make this come to fruition. Faye's already thanked BCPVPA, its executive and members, and I'd like to thank the Ontario Principals Council, the executive and its members who participated in the Ontario study to help this come to fruition. When you see the final report, there are many recommendations that we make. And one of the things that's very clear is that work intensification is here and it's not going away. And this study happened before the pandemic. We are collecting data now during the pandemic to see how principals' work is pivoting based on what's required of them now. And we have some concerns, obviously, and some of that is that principals' well-being is being challenged because of work intensification. And so there really needs to be, we advocate that there be ad hoc committee either at the provincial level, district levels to look at the changing role of principals. In some jurisdictions around the world, they've actually created other kinds of positions to support school leadership. Many jurisdictions argue that school leadership is leadership by a team. And so, for instance, in Chile, they have a pedagogical specialist. In the UK, in some regions, they have a financial school leader. They have a financial superintendent. And these are all ways to reorganize the role so that there can be a concentration on pedagogical leadership or instructional leadership, whatever it's called in your district, in your area. There needs to be some kind of way to address the increased allocation of resources and volume that principals are experiencing. And we also truly believe that there should be some kind of a work study of the school system. It's not just principals' work, it's school leaders' work, it's work within the system. Many principals will say they've been involved in caring for children in many different ways, not just in teaching and learning. And we would agree with that. The research says that, but the degree to which this is happening now has changed because there are changes in other public sectors that are coming to bear unintended consequences on the education system. And that cannot go unnoticed. Create opportunities for racialized principals to succeed. We have talked about that and included that in all of our research because all of our research demonstrates that our school leadership population in Ontario and British Columbia is predominantly white, and that does not reflect the students that the public education system serves. And for the management and administrative aspects of principals' work. We strongly encourage either boards and or ministries of education to think about creating online provincially standardized templates, sample documents, and an interactive portal, particularly during the pandemic time, because one never knows whether this is going to be virtual learning, blended learning, face-to-face learning that's back in a school site, or a combination of all of that, depending on how things unfold with the pandemic. And I'm conscious of time. We've run over by 4 minutes. So what I would like to say before we take questions is thank you for all of you who have come on in your busy lives to listen to us today. We have resources that we have shared in the chat box. There are a number of links to the infographics. Please keep an eye on our websites. Our reports will be coming out in the next 2 weeks. There's also reports on our VP study and also our study with French and French Catholic principals. And I'd like to thank Faye for being a great research colleague with me. And Faye, is there anything else that you'd like to share?
No, I think we can just open up to the questions. Also, we have our contact information on the slide. If we don't have enough time to get to all the questions, please feel free to reach us. And also follow us on Twitter. We will be sharing more of our research findings through Twitter.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So Benita, I believe you will facilitate this and ask the questions for us. Thank you, Andre. Andre asks, what is the biggest barrier to support for principals' well-being? Andre, just for confirmation, do you mean supporting them from a systems level or individually at their work? I can ask, I'll start answering, and if I don't answer your question, you can please follow up. So barriers to supporting principals' well-being. As if any of you are practitioners, you will know that through social media and through probably your professional associations, there is quite a bit of support for individuals' well-being in the sense of strategies that individuals can use regardless of what profession you're in. Be it related to cognitive behavioral therapy to relieve stress and anxiety, be it to coaching around sleeping, coaching strategies around healthy eating, and those kinds of things. There are less supports around supporting principals in the work that is the essence of what they do with schools and schooling and supporting students. And my concern around supporting principals, one of the barriers is sometimes the attitude of people who hold power, in the sense that our concern is we present data, we present our findings and information, and how it is understood and taken up can be in a way that may and has in the past been perceived that it is an individual issue, work intensification, and that coping and coping well is an individual issue. So we always need to do things to individuals. Well, that's not necessarily the case. You can share as many resilient workshops as you want to principals. If the intensification and the way work is presented and unfolds does not change, it won't matter how resilient principals are. They will still experience challenges to their well-being. So one of the challenges to supporting principals is understanding that it's not, in some cases, individuals can learn more, sure, but there needs to be also a systems approach. And if we don't consider that we need to also ask, what can the system do? Be that whether it's a school board or a district, or whether it's a provincial government, we need to ask that, and we need to be willing to not only ask it, but to actively listen and to sincerely try to make the required change that's needed. Because there's a lot of downloading of work and not a lot of offloading. So as one principal said to me at one time, there's this platter, and on the platter, all the stuff that's on it is all the work we have to do. And it seems like there's more things added to the platter and less things taken off. So system-wise, the challenge to supporting principals is saying, what can we take off the platter? And when principals are asked, it's difficult to say what can be taken off, because we're not provided with the opportunity to say what needs to be prioritized over one other thing. Faye, is there anything that you'd like to share?
Yeah, another aspect is how we conceptualize or understand the notion of well-being. It seems currently, whenever we talk about well-being, we tend to focus more on mental health, even though it's a significant part of well-being. But in our survey, we basically intentionally expanded the notion of well-being, trying to look at well-being from different aspects. As you may have noticed that the principal's emotional, physical, social well-being has been significantly affected by their work. So I think it's important to think about what do you mean by well-being and how we can approach it in a very holistic manner without ignoring some other important aspect of principal's well-being and work. And the second is that in lots of our work, we tend to focus on well-being of students and teachers. So I think it is equally important to think about how we can divert some of the attention to principals' well-being, because they are also part of the educated team. They are also part of the system. And I think Katina also touched on the system, and because as you may see in our survey, we have quite a number of questions on principals' self-care, but those self-care mostly can be used to cope the work-related issues more at the school or at organizational level, but cannot be really used to cope with issues at the larger social or system level, such as the policies or other social aspects. So the question is how we can develop some kind of strategy or support to support principals, not only relying on their self-care, but also take a overall approach by involving all stakeholders to support principals' health and well-being.
Thank you, Faye. And I'd also like to jump on there. It's also not just the Ministry of Education necessarily, because when we started this journey, this is just a time and point in our journey around principals' work, which started in 2012, 2013. And when we started our first studies, I was called by principals who said, you've missed the boat on some things. You never asked us about, our physical well-being, about being harassed or assaulted. And these are things that we made sure that we included this time, because well-being, as Faye has shared, it is more than just some of the mental health things. And so that brings in then the Ministry of Labor, the Department of Health, those kinds of things. So when we talk about stakeholders, I should clarify that Dr. Faye Wong and I are thinking about stakeholders in a very broad sense from a work-related position. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Faye, do you want to start this one and then I'll jump in?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. It seems there's a tendency that we're developing all kinds of professional practice standards, like leadership standards in the States and also in Ontario. BC also has a similar approach. Um, yeah, I think one of the aspect is based on our research, principals tend, even though they want to spend more time on instructional curriculum leadership, which is also a strong, a big focus of the leadership standards, but they do not have time or they cannot spend more time on the instructional leadership or transformational leadership. I think when we design or create these leadership standards, we also need to look into the reality and what are the constraints, what kind of support services can be available or effective to support principals to be educators and leaders, not just the managers or administrators.
Yes, I agree. The question has gone now. I'm not sure where it went, but I would like to thank you very much. What we have found is that principals struggle to around standards because sometimes it's standards for the end goals of educating students, and sometimes there's pragmatic managerial things that happen that overwhelmingly take over some of the work that needs to happen. And I always say what principals create the conditions for the teaching and learning to happen, and they will do what they need to do to make sure that students and teachers and all educators in the building, in the system somewhere, wherever they are, whether they're in a building or not, have the conditions for children to learn. And sometimes in some situations, it can be work that's not captured in standards. Standards don't always necessarily change behavior. It can guide it. Sometimes standards also need to respond to what's happening in the field. Thank you. Consumer mentality. Faye, I feel that this one is one that's more prevalent for you in British Columbia. Do you want to start?
Yeah.
I'll respond.
Sure. This one is basically based on the interviews and the focus groups we have done before we launched the survey. So during the interview, some of the principals indicated there's a stronger entitlement from the parents in terms of their kids' education. And they see the education is basically a business. They feel like they are more consumers. They want benefit more from the education for their kids. So basically, this also related to the issue of the parent engagement. And also, one of the questions we asked, what are the what would lead to the draining situations? And this came out quite a number of times. So we included this, trying to capture how that is affecting principals, and basically it became one of the stressors or factors that lead to draining situations to school principals. And it is also related to the fact that there are different perceptions among the public or the parent community in terms of what is the purpose of public education. What does that mean? So the different understanding basically contribute to how people approach education for their kids. Kadina, do you have anything to add?
No, that's great. No, you covered it. Thank you. So we wouldn't be, so any thoughts on how principal workload would compare in provinces where they are in same union or association as teachers, different from Ontario, BC. We wouldn't be able to answer that based on the studies that we actually have done. The reason why we included Ontario and British Columbia was because structurally they were quite similar, because we wanted to make sure that what Ontario was experiencing wasn't just an Ontario phenomena. And there are many similarities from our preliminary look at the data around what Ontario principals are experiencing and BC principals are experiencing, yet they're nuanced because of the context. Context always matters. Our next step actually is to do research in provinces where principals are a part of unions and teacher unions and associations, to see if that has an impact on the work they do and related to schooling. I would say that there are differences based on how or the nature of their work unfolds, whether they're a part of the teacher association or not. They all still lead, they all still set goals, they all still build reform relationships, engage community. How they go about doing that appears to be somewhat different based on whether principals are part of the associations or not, because there's an added layer of politics and negotiations that occur when principals are not a part of teacher associations. And, from a research perspective, we can't necessarily answer that. That's a great question to ask us probably in a year's time or so. Faye, is there anything that you want to share?
I think you speak to it well. So our next step basically is to do further data mining and do some comparative analysis or inferential analysis. But at this particular stage, we are just basically focusing on the preliminary analysis with what we have.
So I see it is 2 minutes after 2, and people are signing off. I think what we should probably do now is stop at this point. If you have further questions, as I say, and as Dr. Fei Wong said, please send them with us. We will try to answer them as best as we can, and of course, answer them either through, we can share with you personally through email, or if you want us to share in another venue, we can do that as well. But thank you all. We really appreciate the questions, and I wish we had more time.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Bye-bye.